Here we go. Last race of the day. I am impressed by how many butts, can I say that, are still in the seats. So good for you on a Sunday afternoon. We all appreciate it, particularly your candidates, but we league members love it when people come out to really see your local candidates, the ones who stay here and live here and work for you here. We have a nice big panel here for State's Attorney, and we will do as we've done before, just as a reminder. Everybody gets 2 minutes opener, a minute for questions, 1.5 minutes to sum. Bring your, hold your question cards up if you haven't already. I've actually got a nice stack here. No personal attacks, of course. There can be things, as we saw earlier today, might be directed only at incumbents. Only an incumbent might have a specific question, but all of the candidates, if they would like to, will also have a minute to address those questions. So, with no further ado, we will start with Mr. Matthews, who has 2 minutes.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for coming out. Experience, dedication, and commitment. That are the attributes that define me. For over 13 years, I've been committed to protecting and serving the people of Lake County. Initially, as a probation officer, where for 3 years it was my job to go around the county and ensure that individuals were adhering to the conditions that were imposed by the court, to make sure they were doing their public service, maintaining employment, and most of all, not re-victimizing the victims, to make sure they were law-abiding, and make sure they were no longer a blight on society. After the 3 years of being a probation officer, I knew I needed to do more. So I went on to law school, where I earned my law degree. I since then became an assistant state's attorney, where for the last 10 years I've done that. I've prosecuted cases on behalf of you, the people of Lake County. I've prosecuted almost every crime imaginable. I prosecuted murders, home invasions, armed robberies, and I've done it to the best of my ability with credibility and with integrity. I've never left you during those 13 years, and I have no plans on leaving you now. I'm a member of the Child Abduction Response Team, where when a child goes missing, they call me, so that we can make sure that that child returns home safely. I have the total package of experience, like I said, the dedication and the commitment. And I look forward to your support and your vote March 20th, 2012, and also in the general election. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Kennedy.
Thank you. I'm Chris Kennedy. I've been an attorney 17 years here in Lake County. I started my career as a prosecutor here in this county. I believe that the state's attorney of Lake County should be an example and a model for other offices, and I think that can be achieved. I have a record of leadership and proven reforms, and besides my resume, in which I've handled violent felonies, all kinds of criminal cases as a prosecutor, I've also handled every kind of case that a state's attorney is likely to encounter on the civil side as well. But it's not just my job and the resume spots that I have, but it's the things that I've made it my job to do. When my wife and I experienced the challenges of raising a child with disabilities, we discovered the shortfalls of the state of Illinois. I decided to do something about it, and I led a multi-year statewide campaign to change the law, and many years later, 12 laws are now on the books that protect tens of thousands of families in the state of Illinois. It's that record of reform and leadership I intend to bring to this office, because I think this office has become Exhibit A in the national debate over wrongful convictions. And I think we need to change that by confronting these problems head on and by doing something about it. I have a record of having taken on challenges, taken on cases, taken on people in power because it was the right thing to do. Even when it was unpopular to do so, I've done that in my private practice. Another aspect about me personally is that my cousin was a victim of murder, and I bring that up because it motivates me to prevent this from happening to any other family, and also to make sure that the state's attorney becomes a voice for victims. We should never have to hear that a victim has felt victimized by the system. These are the things that I intend to bring to the office. I hope to have your support, again, I really believe that this office can and should be a model for others. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Nerheim.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Mike Nerheim, and I'm running for the Office of State's Attorney. I thank the League of Women Voters for hosting this forum today. I believe the Office of State's Attorney is more than merely that of an administrator, because as State's Attorney, you are first and foremost a prosecutor. And as a prosecutor, you are the chief law enforcement officer for the county. And in that position, you are uniquely situated to ensure that the streets of our county are safe and that everybody, whether you're a defendant, a victim, a witness, anybody that has access to our criminal justice system is treated fairly. I believe it's my experience that makes me uniquely situated for this position. I have worked in the state's attorney's office. I've handled thousands of criminal cases, serious, violent felony cases. I've prosecuted official misconduct. I've prosecuted murder. But I've also done more than that. I've worked as a defense attorney, representing people charged with crimes to make sure that their rights were adhered to. I've also been appointed by the courts in Lake County to investigate post-conviction allegations of constitutional wrongdoing. I've been appointed by the courts to represent indigent defendants. I've handled complex civil litigation. I've handled municipal law. I teach evidence at Columbia College of Missouri, and I'm a proud parent of 3, and I'm a lifelong resident of Lake County. I believe, again, the job of state's attorney is to be the chief law enforcement officer for the county, to protect you, to protect my family, and to protect yours. I hope they're in your trust and your support. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Hayes?
Thank you so much. Can you hear me? Is this one on?
I'm not, is it on?
Yes.
I'm so close. Hear me? I think that's okay. Hi, I'm Louise Hayes, and I'm running for Lake County State's Attorney, and a big thank you to everybody who came out this afternoon, especially to the League of Women Voters. I got hired in 1990 by the then State's Attorney Fred Foreman as an Assistant State's Attorney, and I have been working in the office for the last 20 years, 20 plus years. Mike Waller's been my boss. I worked my way through the office, as all these other people up here who have worked in our office have done, and I've worked in almost every single division and done almost every single job in the State's Attorney's office. I have been proud to serve the people of Lake County, and that's why I am still in the office. As one of these colleagues said, that the State's Attorney is the chief prosecuting person in the office. And I'm going to submit to you that if you want to be a police chief, you are a police officer. You're out there on the beat, you're protecting our neighborhoods, you're collecting evidence. That's what you do because you want to be the chief of that department. If you want to be the State's Attorney, I submit to you that you are an Assistant State's Attorney, that you are in the office fighting the fight every day, and that it has been a privilege to talk with the victims. And you work every day with the attorneys in our office. You know everybody in our office. You know the counselors. You know the investigators.
In the next town over, the issue could be child support enforcement and deadbeat parents. Yet while in the next town over, the issue could be drugs in the schools. As another thing that I would like to do for the county as the next State's Attorney is to make sure that we are not wasting valuable time and resources. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Winter.
I too thank everyone for attending tonight. My name is Bryan Winter, and I am, for the last 7 years, I've been the Chief Legal Officer of the Village of Gurnee. That is the second largest municipality in the county. And as you can see, it's a very crowded field, and so in a short time, I'll just tell you 3 points that I'd like to make about my career. The first point, of all the candidates, I have been an attorney the longest. I grew up in Lake County, attended Marquette University, received an accounting degree and law degree, and returned back to Lake County, and I've been practicing for 27 years. Secondly, I have the most diverse background in the legal area. I began as a local prosecutor, handled criminal matters, misdemeanors, and felonies, even argued a murder case successfully at the appellate court. But I've also had the opportunity to handle civil matters. I've represented individuals, corporations, and even utilities. Some very complex litigation. I have handled medical malpractice claims, wrongful death cases, declaratory judgment actions, just a wide range of cases. And the final area is the municipal law. The last 7 years, I'm also the village attorney for Kildare. I've had the opportunity to handle all of the legal matters for the village of Gurnee, whether it's FOIA, Freedom of Information, collective bargaining, all of those types of legal matters that you have to be able to handle in this position. The final point is that of leadership. I'm the only one that has had the opportunity to serve as the president of the Lake County Bar Association. I did that 3 years ago. First person to have People's Law School across the street at CLC as president. And before that, I was elected to the Board of Governors and served as treasurer of the Illinois State Bar Association. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Kennedy will take the first question first. How do you feel about absolute immunity? Do you support holding prosecutors accountable when malicious prosecutions occur instead of extending immunity to them?
I do believe in holding accountable people who are in government. Immunity comes about through the 11th Amendment to the Constitution. I'm not sure without a constitutional amendment that provision could be changed, but I do believe that accountability is something that can and must be reformed in the State's Attorney's Office currently. One of the main things that I've heard from people who have felt victimized by the system, by the State's Attorney's response to their case, etc., is that they felt excluded, that they felt wronged by it. I do believe that the State's Attorney sets the tone and ought to lead on those issues by being personally accountable. One of the things that I will do as State's Attorney is actually get out in front of people, get into the community, and listen to people who agree with me, and most of all, people who disagree with me, and actually seek input, seek criticism, seek constructive input into how the office is run. And I think that's the best way that the State's Attorney of Lake County can really handle that without amending the United States Constitution.
Thank you. Mr. Nerheim.
I also believe in accountability. I believe in the Constitution. But we as prosecutors, as State's Attorneys, are leaders. We're leaders of the community, and we need to lead and lead by example. And I've also spoken with many members of the community, victims groups, and a lot of people that have felt that they were not listened to when their cases were handled by the State's Attorney's Office. And to me, that is inexcusable. I do believe that as State's Attorney, your job is to prosecute a case on behalf of the people of the state of Illinois, not necessarily on behalf of the victim. But every prosecutor in the State's Attorney's Office is to listen to the victim and seek their input when cases are resolved. And cases will not be resolved in my State's Attorney's Office without input from the victim.
Thank you. Ms. Hayes.
Our office has a number of excellent prosecutors. I have seen these people working hard, weekends, talking with victims. We have the victim counselor group. I go out to the community and I see a lot of time, I don't think people realize how much the State's Attorney's Office does. So we prosecute everything from traffic tickets to first-degree murders. So we have victim counselors that is their job, to go and to talk with the victims, meet them with the attorneys as well, show them where the courtrooms are. Those are things that we do every day. These hard-working victim counselors, along with the investigators in our office, along with the attorneys, we're not going to change the law. There's absolute immunity. I am confident that in our office, the standard is obviously, and it has been, and it will continue with me, that we will not prosecute people who did not commit the crime. I don't want it. No excellent prosecutor wants any innocent person put behind bars.
Thank you. Ms. Williams.
I would have to say that in most cases, I believe that there are exceptions to most rules. And that means that while I do believe in immunity, I believe also in accountability, which means that where there is negligence or downright abuse of a system, people who have not done what they were supposed to do, especially to the detriment of others, should be held accountable just like any other citizen of Lake County.
Thank you. Mr. Winter?
Yes, immunity cannot be used as a shield. The State's Attorney has many responsibilities, and certainly the responsibility is to serve all the residents in the county. And the way to do that is, well, we're going to go through this elective process. So the voter gets the opportunity to make the assessment as to what candidates are going to be able to address issues. My message always is success is never final. We have a good office and good people. But you have to make sure that you remain current and that you have the strategies so that you're addressing the concerns, that you are making sure that your office, and there's no reason why this office, the third largest county in the state, cannot be the best there is in the state. And so again, although there's immunity, there is certainly responsibility, and I'm sure all of the candidates understand those responsibilities.
Thank you. Mr. Nerheim takes this next question first. Thank you.
We do not enjoy absolute immunity as prosecutors. We have what's called qualified immunity. What that means is this. That means that if we are acting in a malicious way or in a way that exhibits malfeasance or official misconduct, we can be sued. And it's called qualified immunity. And that qualified immunity is important because as a prosecutor, you don't want them to have a freeze effect. You want them to go out there and use their discretion to diligently prosecute a case, to diligently fight for the victim and protect society. As a prosecutor, it has not been uncommon for me to call a victim 9 o'clock at night, just let them know what's going on. I don't believe in putting the job upon somebody else. I do it first, and then I tell the victim witness counsel, then you can call the victim. But you need to hear from me first. As a leader of the state attorney's office, I'll make sure that everybody does their job in an honest way with utmost integrity. So that's why I think that's important.
Thank you. Mr. Nerheim, DNA is such an important part of this election. Have you specifically prosecuted and or defended with DNA? Not someone in your office, but you specifically. What education and or experience have you had with regard to DNA?
I've both prosecuted and defended with DNA. I've prosecuted rape cases as an assistant state attorney using DNA, and I've used DNA in defense of clients charged with serious felony cases. I'm proud of the experience I have using DNA. I am on faculty at Columbia College in Missouri where I teach evidence. And part of my class is I teach DNA. So I think of all the candidates, when it comes to experience with DNA, I have by far the most.
Okay, thank you so much. Yes, over the course of my last 20 years, I have prosecuted cases involving DNA. I have not ever defended a case using DNA. When I am the state's attorney, I am hoping that we are going to train our office top to bottom in DNA. And I mean training by forensic experts. That is one of the goals that I set out last summer, and I intend that that's what we're going to do. There's definitely some lacking in the DNA experience in our office, and that is clearly on the agenda of something to do.
Thank you. Ms. Williams.
I have not had experience prosecuting or defending with DNA except to the extent of family law litigation. I think that it has been made pretty clear that I am not and I have not been an assistant state's attorney, but what I am and what I have been is a resident and a citizen and a taxpaying citizen of Lake County, and just like any other taxpaying citizen of Lake County who can look at a system and look at an office and see how it's run and see how it impacts us and see how it impacts our tax dollars, and pay attention to where the bleeding is and where the issues are, where the concerns are, and I'm going to go in there and figure out what needs to be done by surrounding myself with the people who are most qualified in the office and outside of the office to make sure that the office gets the training, including having myself up to snuff, even not going into, having to go into a courtroom as a prosecutor, as state's attorney, but making sure that my office and the staff is well trained. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Winter?
I too have not had a DNA case in the criminal setting. I have handled numerous product liability cases and medical cases that certainly have many experts and sometimes product liability cases, forensic experts. What's important in the DNA area is that that's a piece of evidence, but it is how the office processes that evidence and how it considers that evidence in its prosecution of cases, which I think has been an issue that has been raised in a couple of cases. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Matthews.
Thank you so much. Of all the candidates, I'm the only full-time prosecutor who has prosecuted cases with DNA and continue to do so. I've dismissed cases where I found that the DNA has shown it wasn't the individual. And I've done that right away. I didn't wait till a later time to do it. I did it right away. DNA is a piece of evidence, and it must be viewed in light of the other evidence around it. A quick example is you have an individual that's a murder, and the blood comes back not to the victim or the defendant, but you have a defendant who's given confession, you have the defendant's shoe print in the blood, and you have his fingerprints in the house. If you look at the DNA by itself, one would say it wasn't that person, it wasn't DNA. But if you look at the fact he gave a confession, his shoe print is in the blood, and his fingerprints in the house, you look at it different. So you look at the evidence of totality, not in isolation.
Thank you. Mr. Kennedy.
Thanks. I've taught criminal justice, criminal evidence classes, and including DNA evidence. The issue here, though, is not whether we've collected it properly. It's not whether we've entered it into evidence properly or gotten it admitted to the coded database, et cetera. It's whether or not we've been willing to, and whether or not we've been willing, as your public servants, to accept what that DNA evidence means for your case. In all of these cases that have been in the media, there was never a question as to whether or not, never a legitimate question as to whether or not DNA evidence actually tested out properly. The question was, are we willing to accept that we may have been in error, and what are we going to do about it when we do discover it? In the appellate court argument, the attorney argued that, and I agree, DNA evidence is God's gift to forensic science. We can't ignore it or explain it away in outlandish terms. What we need to do is have the courage to accept what it means.
Thank you. Ms. Hayes will take the next question first. Name one new program or emphasis you will initiate as state's attorney.
Last summer, when I announced that I was going to run for Lake County State's Attorney, at that time, I indicated that we would implement a post-conviction review board. Our office, in the last 2 weeks, has just started that program with the new supervisor who's taking over our criminal division. Underneath one of his many roles will be to head an integrity unit. In speaking with him, it is to review old cases. So those were some things that we had mentioned last summer, and I think those are things that will benefit the office. So I guess that would be the one thing.
Thank you. Ms. Williams?
One of the programs that I believe as state's attorney it would be important for me to implement is a community outreach program educating and involving the public in what goes on with the state's attorney's office. I think that there are far too many voters who don't even understand what the state's attorney's office does, how many different departments or divisions it has, and what it handles. I also believe that there are several programs that the state's attorney's office, and in addition to that, the police department have in place for victims and for other people in the community that the public needs to be educated about. I will put a special task force, volunteers, interns, and certain state's attorneys, as well as myself, to go out, also setting up educational programs where everybody would be invited in, and then going out to remote places to educate the public about what the state's attorney's office is and what we do.
Thank you. Mr. Winter.
As long as the integrity panel has been mentioned, that too would be one of the programs that I would institute. It would be a conviction integrity panel. It would not be merely a post-conviction. And essentially, that program has begun now, but there aren't yet any written protocols, and that will have to be done. I also think that what's really needed is before you get to the conviction, that you are helping the assistants that are assigned to cases so that at some point, almost having a mock trial, and I've participated in a couple of mock trials on some major cases, and basically what that forces the attorney that's handling the case to do is to present a synopsis of the case, actually some of the evidence, to peers that they can hear your case to make sure that the attorneys in your office are following the right path. And they can have people actually hear the case, be devil's advocates, make suggestions. And that's something that has to be done in a conviction integrity panel that begins at the very beginning and goes throughout the process.
Thank you. Mr. Matthews.
Thank you. Post-conviction integrity unit sounds like a good idea, and if it's implemented, that's fine. But I believe, man, we need to do it before we get there. Before we imprison someone or take someone's life from them or their liberty, we need to make sure that we have done it based on the evidence and nothing but the evidence. That's why I propose a vertical prosecution unit of violent crime. And what a vertical prosecution unit does, is that at the very beginning, at the very onset, when a case comes in, it will be assigned to an assistant who will handle it from indictment stage all the way through plea or trial. By that way, they can get a hold of the case right away and discover right away if there's DNA that's involved. And if so, they can get on top of it right away so that we're not hearing about it years later, but right at the onset.
Thank you. Mr. Kennedy?
When I announced my candidacy July 7, 2011, I announced that the first order of business would be to implement a conviction integrity unit. I'm glad to hear that that is now being taken up by others, but I believe that it should not only have a post-conviction authority, but also have authority going forward, so that the state's attorney themselves can initiate, but also defense. If there's a plausible claim of actual innocence in a case, that they can bring it before this a unit within, and my proposal is a specific unit empowered by the office with an advisory panel of outside people. And that should also drive home, going forward, learning the lessons and applying them. In addition to that, I proposed the establishment of a sex crimes unit, because these are extremely difficult cases that shouldn't be just lumped into the ordinary docket of an overburdened felony assistant. These should be handled with individual care and with the time and resources that are needed to deal with them. I have a number of other proposals too on my website, chriskennedy2012.com.
Thank you. Mr. Nerheim?
Well, I too have been proposing this panel since day one of my campaign. I was the second Republican candidate to announce, and I think the first Republican candidate to announce this proposal. And my unit would consist of more than one person. It would consist of a panel of people from a wide variety of experience, defense attorneys, retired judges, prosecutors, and law enforcement, who would look at some of these old cases to ensure that these convictions were handled properly. But again, this is more than just looking at old cases. The point is well taken. If you get it after there's a conviction, oftentimes it's too late. This panel will also develop protocols. So as we move forward in prosecuting all cases, we ensure that we're getting it right the first time, because a conviction has to be proper.
Thank you. Ms. Williams takes the next question first. What is your opinion about cameras in the courtroom?
My opinions about cameras in the courtroom is that I'm all for it. The courtroom is a public forum. Anybody on any day of the week can walk into most trials, into most courtrooms, and observe the trials. However, everybody is not available to do so, whether it's because of work or other lifestyle changes or lifestyles. And so I believe that having the opportunity to view it through a camera is a great idea. I think it's good for the public. I think it's good for education, and I think that it helps us as attorneys to stay on our toes and making sure that we are fully prepared to handle a case.
Thank you. Mr. Winter?
I've had the opportunity in mock trial situations where it's recorded, and it's basically for the benefit of your client, and we actually even record jury deliberations, and that can be very instructive. So I'm supportive of that, the aspect where there's transparency. The proposal that has been approved in our state will also, though, provide safeguards. Certainly in juvenile cases, certainly where the presiding judge thinks it's a sensitive case, either because of witnesses or some other issues, the presiding judge will retain the authority to either grant or deny those requests. And certainly, beginning this process, that seems like a logical first approach so that we can actually see how those cameras work in our courtrooms. From a practical standpoint, some of the facilities may be actually intrusive depending on the size of the courtroom, but overall, I do support, and I think obviously the Supreme Court is always right, and they did a good job first step.
Thank you. Mr. Matthews?
I'm encouraged by the aspect of having cameras in the courtroom, but I would caution that the only qualification would be that in certain cases, like step cases, where you have a child of a certain age, my concern is that there needs to be safeguards to make sure that the cameras are on that child. It's already difficult for the child to come forward.
You know,
If they feel that their private tragedies are going to be played out on TV, they're not going to want to be part of it, or it may alter testimony. There's certainly many examples of cases in which you've seen the celebritization and sensationalization of crime and of the witnesses, and I think that that can detract from the system. So I think it is a positive development in some aspects, but I would be really reticent to implement a large-scale program in the criminal courts, because I think in civil cases, certainly, but it's absolutely inappropriate in juvenile cases, in most family matters, and anything involving the privacy and dignity of victims. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Nerheim?
I support anything that helps to bring transparency to what we as prosecutors do. Currently, courtrooms are open to the public, they're open forums, and I encourage everybody to go into courtrooms and watch the proceedings, because it is important. We, as public servants, answer to the community. So I do support cameras in the courtroom, but I do have reservations, like my colleagues. I've worked with a lot of victims of crime, and I know that it does have a chilling effect. It's hard enough for a victim, whether it be a juvenile or an adult victim, to come into a court and to testify about what is probably the worst thing that has ever happened to you. And to add to that pain and suffering by putting a camera on somebody makes matters much worse. But I am pleased that the Supreme Court has developed protocols that allow the presiding judge to develop rules with respect to the use of these courtroom cameras. And I'd be happy to work with the presiding judges in Lake County to help develop those rules to help ensure that people's rights, their privacy rights, are protected.
Thank you. Ms. Hayes?
Yeah, I'm not going to repeat what everyone here has said. Clearly, I agree with Mr. Winter, Mr. Matthews, Mr. Nerheim, safeguarding our minors, and I am all for transparency in the courtrooms. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Winter takes the next question first. List practical ways you will take care of the backlog of DNA evidence that should be processed and the information be used correctly.
Well, we're very fortunate. The Northern Illinois Crime Lab is doing a good job. There still is a backlog, but if there is a case that the state needs to have evidence processed in a more timely fashion, they can submit a priority request and get that information in short order. With regard to DNA evidence, though, there's no question that there should not be any concerns among our residents that the office is seriously considering DNA evidence at the earliest opportunity in every case, because that technology has developed over the last 20 years, and there's been mention about the CODIS data system. It's become much more accessible, and there's more entries. It is going to be an effective way to investigate and to close cases. And so, again, there is the platform to handle those cases properly.
Thank you. Mr. Matthews?
This is where my vertical prosecution unit comes in, because once the assistant who's assigned to that violent crime is the case at the onset, right at indictment, they can begin to examine the case right away to determine if there's a DNA component to it, and if so, to address it right away. We do rely on our crime lab, the Northern Illinois Eastern Crime Lab, to process that information. But they're not the only crime lab. There's also the Illinois State Police Crime Lab, and there's crime labs throughout the country. We should not just allow them to have a monopoly on it. We need to make sure that if they're backlogged, then we need to go to the next agency. But no matter what, society must come first. There's no expense to place on, a price to place on somebody's life and freedom, or on the victims to make sure that the case is properly prosecuted. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Kennedy?
A new law just went into effect January 1st that requires testing of all sex offenders in the state of Illinois without regard to where they committed their offense. It'll also move up the time period for testing someone and taking their DNA sample from a time of conviction up until the time of finding a probable cause. So we're going to see, and we already have started getting more samples in. So the backlog in DNA testing in the crime labs is already underway. I think the state's attorney can take the role of advocate in asking and demanding for greater budgetary resources, which is also part of that law, to be assigned to stop the backlog, because these are critical cases. We can prevent more crime by getting these things into the CODIS database. One other point about that, rape kits are still backlogged and consistently have been for many years. And again, I think the role of the state's attorney can be one of an advocate that would actually forcefully demand that these things be taken care of. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Nerheim?
Well, this is a growing problem because currently every felony conviction requires the defendant to submit a sample of his or her DNA into this database, which is already backlogged. And I foresee a situation in the near future where upon every arrest, people will be required to submit a sample of their DNA into this backlog, which will continue to increase the problem. We need to work with the state police. We need to work with the authorities to ensure that proper funding is granted to these agencies to help them continue to test this and make sure that this backlog is reduced. And I also believe that we can work as prosecutors to flag those cases early on in the early stages of their investigation and certainly in their prosecution to pick out those cases where DNA is going to be a key issue and focus on those cases and work with the lab to ensure that those cases are moved up so we can get that DNA tested quickly.
Thank you. Ms. Hayes?
Okay, we already do prioritize our cases, and I do know that Mike Waller is an advocate for prioritizing cases that we need the DNA on quickly. There is a backlog, the number of people with the new laws, the amount of DNA that we have to take. I think the state's attorney's office needs to work with the crime labs, the Illinois State Police Lab, we could use more. But again, funding is going to be an issue. We're going to have to look at some outside resources that we can obtain because the county board is very strict with our budget, and I don't see any extra money coming from them anytime soon. But I do think reaching out to some of the other crime labs around the area on some of our very serious cases is probably the way to go.
Thank you. Ms. Williams?
Right off the top, I think that there are three key things that would be important in helping to prevent a backlog or to open up the backlog. One of those items would be breaking up any monotonies that exist as far as the labs are concerned. We've all experienced it in different areas of our lives where one entity or one or two entities hold all the contracts, all the power, and therefore the time resource is we're at their discretion, at their mercy with regard to the time issue. So I think that spreading out where the DNA or forensic evidence is issued for that analysis. I think that another thing is I agree with Mr. Matthews in saying that I think this is a place where we should not be looking at cutting costs, but in fact making sure that we have money available, and that means going into the budget to find other places where we can cut back on things so that we can make sure that money is available there, that we do that. And then, thank you.